They say the Emperor saves, that he descends from the stars to claim his sons, to restore what was stolen, to lift them from suffering into glory. I believed this once. I believed it in the arena pits when I fought beside my brothers and sisters, when we carved our freedom from the flesh of our masters, when we stood together on that mountain knowing we would die free rather than live in chains. The Emperor came for me on that mountain. He found me surrounded by armies, my gladiator brothers bleeding out in the dust, victory so close I could taste it on the wind. They say he saved me. This is what they write in their chronicles, what they whisper in the halls of terror, what they teach to those who come after, that I was rescued, that I was delivered from certain death into a higher purpose. But I remember what happened on that mountain. I remember the choice I made and the choice that was stolen from me. My name is Angron, and this is the dark truth behind the day I was taken from Nuceria. I do not remember being born. The Nucerian slave pits do not permit such luxuries as birth records or family names, or the gentle fiction that a slave child belongs to anyone except his master. My first memory is pain. Not the clean pain of a blade or the hot pain of fire, but the specific agony of metal inserted into living brain tissue. The sensation of wires threading through gray matter while overseers held my child body still against the operating table. I was 6 standard Terran years old. The butcher's nails, they called them, an archaeotech implant system designed by the High Riders of Nuceria to transform human beings into perfect weapons. The technology was ancient, recovered from some pre-imperial Dark Age cache, its original purpose lost, but its function preserved. When implanted into the brain's pain centers, the nails created a simple feedback loop. Experience pain, receive pleasure. Kill, receive ecstasy. The slave masters of Nuceria had refined this system over centuries of use in their arena games, learning exactly which neural pathways to sever, which to enhance, which to leave intact so that the resulting gladiator retained enough cognitive function to fight tactically while being driven by an insatiable hunger for violence. The procedure was not designed for children. The mortality rate for subjects under 10 years old approached 90%. I survived. This was not mercy. This was not fortune. I survived because something in my biology rejected death with the same fury I would later bring to the arena floor. The overseers noted this in their records. Subject displays unusual resilience. Enhanced healing factor observed. Recommend aggressive training schedule. They did not know what I was. The High Riders who ordered my implantation believed me to be simply another slave child, perhaps unusually large and strong, but ultimately just flesh to be shaped into entertainment for their jaded appetites. They could not have known that the blood running through my veins carried the genetic legacy of the Emperor himself. That I was one of 20 suns scattered across the galaxy, each a demigod created to conquer stars. All they knew was that I survived the nails when I should have died, and that survival made me valuable. The first weeks after implantation were madness. The nails had not yet integrated fully with my neural architecture. Every sensation was wrong, translated through damaged pathways into cascading storms of rage and pain. I remember clawing at my own skull, trying to dig the metal out with fingernails too soft to pierce skin. I remember screaming until my voice failed. I remember the overseers beating me unconscious and waking to find myself restrained, my small body strapped to a stoner bench in a cell that stank of blood and excrement. They fed me thin gruel and water. They kept me alive. And slowly, day by day, my brain learned to accommodate the invasion. The storms of undirected rage became focused. The pain became purposeful. I learned that when I hurt others, the nails rewarded me with chemical floods of pleasure so intense they eclipsed every other sensation. I learned that killing produced an ecstasy beyond description, a moment of perfect clarity where pain ceased entirely and something like peace descended. For a few seconds after a kill, I could think clearly. I could remember who I was before the nails. Then the craving would return, and with it the knowledge that only more violence would grant another moment of respite. This was the cage they built inside my skull, not chains of iron that could be broken, but chains of flesh and neurology that became part of my very existence. And I was 6 years old. By the time I was 8, I had killed 47 other slave children in training combat. By 10, they promoted me to the juvenile arena circuits, where noble families wagered fortunes on which child gladiators would survive to adulthood. By 12, I had a name that crowds chanted, a reputation that preceded me into every pit. They called me the Red Angel then, though I would not learn that name's full significance until much later, until after I had been taken from Nuceria and shown my place in the Emperor's grand design. In the slave pits, I was simply Angron, the one who always won, the one who could not be killed, the one whose rage eclipsed all strategy, all mercy, all the careful political considerations that governed arena combat in civilized Nucerian society. I remember the faces of every child I killed in those early years. This is not metaphor or exaggeration. Something in my enhanced biology, some gift of my primarch nature, granted me perfect recall even through the cognitive damage the nails inflicted. I can close my eyes now, millennia later, and see their expressions in the instant before death. Fear, mostly, sometimes relief, occasionally a flash of understanding, a moment where they recognized that we were not enemies, but fellow victims of the same system, and that my blade was simply reaching them before theirs reached me. None of them had chosen to be there. None of us had. We were property, tools, entertainment. Our lives were measured in the pleasure we provided to our masters through the spectacle of our mutual destruction. And the nails ensured that we would provide that spectacle with enthusiasm, that we would crave the violence they demanded of us, that we would beg for the opportunity to kill because only in killing could we find even temporary relief from the agony of our existence. The transition from juvenile circuits to the great arena of Nuceria came in my 14th year. I had grown rapidly, my primarch physiology finally asserting itself despite the malnutrition and constant trauma of slave life. By human standards, I was a giant. Nearly 7 feet tall, muscles like corded steel, my body a weapon even without the gladiator's arms they permitted me. The high riders recognized that I had reached the pinnacle of what the juvenile circuits could offer. To maintain profitability, to continue extracting value from their investment in my implantation and training, they needed to elevate me to the grandest stage Nuceria possessed. The arena of Nuceria was a monument to Nucerian culture, a massive structure carved from the living rock of the mountains surrounding the city. It could hold 50,000 spectators in tiered galleries that rose so high, the upper levels disappeared into cloud cover during the rainy season. The arena floor itself was larger than most city blocks, a killing ground of sand and stone where the most skilled gladiators of Nuceria fought and died for the amusement of the nobility. I entered that arena wearing bronze and leather, armed with a gladius and a short chain. My first match was against 3 veteran gladiators, a standard arrangement for testing new blood. If I survived, I would prove myself worthy of the great arena. If I died, the crowd would enjoy the spectacle of hubris punished. The nails sang in my skull as the gates opened. That feeling, that specific sensation of the implants activating in anticipation of violence, is impossible to describe to those who have never experienced it. Imagine hunger, but hunger for something that is not food. Imagine an itch that exists not on skin, but in the deep structures of the brain, unreachable by any scratching. Imagine knowing that relief is possible, that peace is attainable, but only through actions that your uncorrupted soul would find abhorrent. That was every moment of my existence. And in the arena, surrounded by enemies, that existence gained purpose. I killed all 3 veterans in less than 2 minutes. The crowd's roar barely registered through the nail's chemical reward. I stood over the bodies, chain dripping blood onto sand already dark with it, and experienced those few seconds of clarity. In that moment, I understood what had been done to me. I understood that I was not simply a good fighter or a naturally violent person. I was a broken thing, a human being whose brain had been rewired to crave murder the way normal humans craved food or water or companionship. And I understood that I would never be free of it, that this was my existence until someone finally killed me in this pit. Then the nails bit again, and understanding was replaced by hunger. I needed to kill again. Needed it the way a drowning man needs air. The arena masters, reading my body language through long experience with nailed gladiators, released more opponents. I killed them, they released more. I killed those too. By the time they finally closed the gates and dragged me back to the cells, I had killed 14 trained gladiators. A new arena record. The crowds went mad. The high riders who owned me quadrupled my value. The other gladiators in the Deshea cells regarded me with a mixture of fear and recognition. Many of them also bore the nails, though most had been implanted as adults when the procedure carried lower mortality risk but also provided less complete integration. They understood what I was, what I had become. But there were others in those cells, fighters who had been enslaved through conquest or debt rather than birth, who still possessed relatively intact neurological function. These were the ones who spoke to me when the nails permitted conversation, who tried to explain the politics of the arena, who formed the first bonds of what would eventually become my army. Winomaus was one of these. A giant of a man even by Primarch standards, a warrior from the southern wastes who had been captured after his entire tribe was slaughtered by High Rider armies. He had fought in the arena for 6 years when we met, had survived through a combination of skill and the patronage of a minor noble family who found his stoic demeanor aesthetically pleasing. He spoke to me after that first match, while I lay in my cell shaking through the chemical crash that followed the nails' activation. "You fight well," he said, his voice carrying the accent of the southern wastes. "But you fight like a beast, without thought, without purpose beyond the next kill." I could barely form words. The nails were quiescent, but not silent, a constant background pressure like an approaching storm. Purpose does not matter. Only survival. "Survival," he repeated, and something in his tone suggested he found the word amusing. "Is that what you call this? This endless dying, one piece at a time in the sand?" I had no answer. He settled against the bars separating our cells. His massive frame relaxed despite the chains binding him. "The High Riders think they have made us into beasts, and perhaps they have. But even beasts can choose the manner of their death, can they not?" His words stayed with me through the months that followed, through dozens of arena matches and the slow accumulation of victories that elevated my status within Deshea's gladiator hierarchy. I began to notice patterns in how the other nailed fighters conducted themselves. Some, like me, had been implanted young and fought with pure, unthinking aggression. Others had learned to manage the implant's demands, to channel the rage into tactical frameworks that allowed them to survive longer against more skilled opponents. Winomaus himself had never been nailed, but he understood their function better than most who bore them. He explained to me during one of our conversations how the implants worked, using knowledge he had gained from observing hundreds of nailed gladiators over his years in the arena. "The nails do not make you more dangerous," he said. "They make you more predictable. Your masters have convinced you that the hunger you feel is strength, but it is limitation. A warrior who can only attack, who can only push forward into violence, is a warrior who can be manipulated by anyone who understands his compulsion." This was heresy by Nucerian standards. The entire culture of the High Riders rested on the belief that the nails elevated gladiators into perfect killing machines, that the implants represented the pinnacle of slave control technology. To suggest that nailed fighters were actually weakened by their implants was to challenge the foundation of Nuceria's social order. But I listened, and slowly, in the moments of clarity between the nails' activation, I began to understand what he meant. I watched myself fight, analyzed my own patterns through memories that my Primarch nature preserved with perfect fidelity. He was correct. I was predictable. Every match followed the same structure: initial aggression, escalating violence, the kill, the moment of peace, the hunger's return. My opponents could read this pattern as easily as I could. The only reason I continued to win was that my physical capabilities exceeded theirs so dramatically that predictability did not matter. I was simply faster, stronger, more durable than anyone else in the arena. But what would happen when I faced opponents who matched my physical gifts? What would happen when I encountered enemies who could exploit my patterns because they understood the nail's limitations as well as a Winnow-mouse did? These questions haunted my moments of clarity, and they led me to an understanding that would eventually spark the rebellion that brought me to that mountain, to the moment when the Emperor descended from the sky. I began to fight differently. Not against the nails, because that was impossible. The implant's demands could not be denied without experiencing agony that eclipsed any pain inflicted by opponents. But I learned to work with the hunger rather than being consumed by it. I learned to recognize the nail's patterns, to anticipate when the craving would spike, to position myself strategically before the compulsion to attack became overwhelming. It was not control. It was accommodation. Learning to live within a cage by understanding its dimensions. Winnow-mouse noticed the change immediately. "You are learning," he said after a match where I had deliberately used the arena's architecture to funnel opponents into killing zones rather than charging directly into their formation. "Good. Now you fight like a warrior rather than a beast." "I still feel the hunger," I replied, the admission bitter on my tongue. "The nails do not stop." "The nails will never stop," he agreed. "But you can choose what you do with the hunger they create. You can choose to be simply their instrument, or you can choose to make them serve your purposes rather than those of your masters." This was the seed. This conversation, this recognition that even with the nails I possessed some degree of agency, some capacity to direct my existence toward purposes beyond simple survival. It grew slowly, fertilized by other conversations with other gladiators, watered by the accumulated rage of hundreds of matches where I killed fellow slaves for the entertainment of nobles who regarded us as less than human. The uprising did not begin with grand speeches or careful planning. It began with a simple refusal. Winnow-mouse was scheduled to fight against a newly arrived gladiator from the eastern provinces, a match his patron had arranged to demonstrate the superiority of southern warriors over eastern techniques. But the day before the scheduled combat, Winnow-mouse's patron died in an accident involving unstable archaeotech weaponry. Without a patron, Winnow-mouse's value plummeted. He became expendable. The new match arrangement called for him to face not one opponent, but 7, a spectacle designed to create a dramatic death scene rather than a genuine contest. He refused, simply did not report to the arena floor when his name was called. This was unprecedented. Gladiators did not refuse matches. The penalty for refusal was immediate execution, usually carried out in the arena itself as a lesson to other slaves about the consequences of disobedience. The arena masters came to his cell with shock mauls and restraints, prepared to drag him to the sand by force. I killed the first master who entered the cell block, not as a considered decision, not as part of any plan. The nails spiked when I heard the commotion, and my body moved before my mind could form thoughts. By the time I achieved those few seconds of post-kill clarity, 3 arena masters lay dead, and the cell block was in chaos. Winnow-mouse looked at me through the bars of his cell, his expression unreadable. "Well," he said after a long moment, "that was a choice." It was a choice. Perhaps the first real choice I had made since the nails were implanted in my skull. Not a choice driven by the implant's hunger, not a choice made in the heat of arena combat, but a deliberate action taken to protect another person. The fact that the nails had provided their reward for the killing did not change the fundamental nature of the decision. I had killed not because the implants demanded it, but because something in me rejected what was being done to Uenomaus. The other gladiators in the cell block faced their own choice then: join us and almost certainly die, or report what had happened and possibly survive. 17 of them chose to join us. We broke open the cells using keys taken from the dead masters. We armed ourselves with their weapons, and we fought our way out of the arena, killing every overseer and master we encountered, burning the training facilities, freeing every slave we could reach. The revolt spread through Deshea in a matter of hours. Thousands of slaves, not just gladiators but also household servants and industrial workers, seized the moment of confusion to rise against their masters. The High Riders responded with their private armies, mechanized units equipped with technology that outmatched anything we could scavenge. The rebellion should have been crushed in a day. But I was a Primarch, even if neither I nor anyone else in Deshea understood what that meant. And Primarchs do not die easily. We fought through the streets of Deshea for 3 days. Every hour brought new tactical lessons, new understanding of how to organize former slaves into something resembling a military force. Uenomaus proved himself a brilliant strategist, turning our apparent weaknesses into advantages by using the city's architecture and the High Riders' own contempt for slave intelligence against them. By the end of the 3rd day, we controlled half the city. The High Riders, shocked by the scale and effectiveness of the uprising, withdrew to their fortified compounds and called for assistance from other city-states. This was when I learned what I was. Not through revelation or dramatic confrontation, but through simple observation of my own capabilities compared to those around me. I could fight for days without rest. I could lift equipment that required 3 normal men to move. I could process tactical information faster than experienced commanders, see patterns in chaos that others missed entirely. And my body healed from injuries that should have been crippling, wounds that would have killed normal humans closing themselves within hours. Uenomaus noticed as well. We stood together on a captured High Rider battlement, surveying the burning city below, and he asked the question that had been building since the revolt began. What are you, Angron? Not human, not entirely. Something else, something more. I had no answer for him then. I knew only that I was different, that something in my blood rejected the limitations that bound normal humans. The nails had hidden this truth from me, their constant demands and the cognitive damage they inflicted masking the deeper capabilities that my Primarch nature granted. But now, surrounded by warriors who looked to me not just for physical prowess, but for leadership and direction, those capabilities could no longer be ignored. I do not know what I am, I admitted, the word strange on my tongue. But I know what I choose to be. Brother to all who stand against these chains. It was a vow, a promise to all who had joined the revolt, to all who had chosen death over continued slavery. We called ourselves the Eaters of Cities after that, a name born from dark humor and the recognition that our survival required destroying the civilization that had enslaved us. We could not negotiate with the High Riders, could not seek peace or compromise. Their entire society was built on our exploitation, and they would never willingly surrender the foundation of their power. So we became what they had tried to make us, instruments of destruction. But we would direct that destruction toward our own purposes rather than their entertainment. The revolt spread beyond Deshea. Other gladiator houses rose in rebellion, inspired by news of our success. Within a month, we controlled 3 city-states and commanded an army of 50,000 freed slaves. The High Riders formed a coalition army, mechanized units and house troops numbering nearly 1 million soldiers, and marched to crush us. We met them on the plains outside Deshea. This battle would later be recorded in Nucerian histories as the Fedan extinction, named for the Fedan Mountains, where we made our stand. But I remember it as the day I learned what war truly meant beyond arena combat. The scale was incomprehensible compared to anything I had experienced. Millions of humans committed to killing each other, their reasons lost in the chaos of massed formations and artillery fire. The nails sang with an intensity that eclipsed all previous experience, an entire army of enemies to kill, an ocean of violence to drown in. I led the center, formation. 17,000 eaters of cities following my charge into the coalition lines. Urnomaus commanded the left flank. A former pit fighter named Kor led the right. We had no artillery, no vehicles, no technology beyond what we could scavenge from defeated enemies. But we had fury, and we had me. I killed 943 coalition soldiers that day. I counted each one in my moments of clarity, the nails granting their chemical reward 943 times, each kill buying me seconds of respite before the hunger returned. Around me, the eaters of cities fought with the desperate skill of those who know defeat means not just death, but a return to slavery worse than death. We broke the coalition center, shattered their formations, drove them back toward the mountains in chaos, but the cost was devastating. Of the 17,000 who charged with me, fewer than 8,000 survived. Urnomaus fell defending the left flank against a counterattack that nearly enveloped our entire force. I found his body after the battle, lying among the enemy dead he had taken with him, his expression peaceful in a way I had never seen during life. I carried his body to the pyre we built for our fallen. Thousands of bodies burning through the night, the smoke visible for miles across the plains. The other eaters of cities looked to me for words, for some meaning to assign to the carnage, but I could offer them nothing. The nails had been active for so many hours that even in their quiescent state they left me barely capable of coherent speech. All I could do was stand vigil through the night, watching smoke carry my friend's ashes into the sky, and wonder whether any freedom was worth such cost. By morning, the answer was clear. We could not stop, could not turn back. The coalition armies would regroup and return. Other city-states would join them. Every high rider on Nuceria now recognized that we represented an existential threat to their civilization. They would commit every resource, mobilize every army, burn every city if necessary to destroy us. And we would fight them. Not because we believed we could win, not because we thought freedom was achievable through military victory, but because the alternative was chains. We would rather die free than live as slaves. The war consumed Nuceria for the next year. We won battles we should have lost through a combination of tactical flexibility, desperate courage, and my own growing mastery of warfare. I learned to command not just in arena combat, but across kilometers of battlefield, to coordinate thousands of fighters, to read enemy movements and anticipate their intentions hours before engagement. This was my Primarch nature fully manifesting, the capabilities the Emperor had designed into me proving themselves in the crucible of total war. But the High Riders learned as well. They learned to avoid direct engagement with my formations. They learned to target our supply lines and support structures. They learned that while I could win any battle I personally participated in, I could not be everywhere at once, could not protect all the freed slaves who looked to me for leadership and salvation. We lost cities as quickly as we had taken them. The civilian population of freed slaves, those who lacked combat training or the nails enhancements, were recaptured or slaughtered, depending on whether the High Riders viewed them as valuable property worth recovering. The eaters of cities who survived grew harder, colder, more focused on pure survival than any grand vision of a free Nuceria. By the war's second year, we had been pushed back to the Phaedon Mountains, the same range where we had won our first great victory. But this time we were not fighting a single coalition army. This time, every High Rider city-state had committed forces to our destruction. Nearly 3 million soldiers surrounded the mountains, cutting off all routes of escape, slowly tightening their perimeter while we starved in our fortified positions. We had perhaps 40,000 effective fighters remaining. The rest of our force, maybe 100,000 people total, consisted of civilians, wounded warriors, and children born to freed slaves during the war. All of them would die when the High Riders finally launched their assault. Or worse, they would be recaptured and returned to slavery as object lessons about the futility of resistance. I called a council with the surviving Eater of Cities commanders. 23 of them remained, including Kor, who had lost an arm in battle but refused to stop fighting. We gathered on the highest peak of the Fedden Mountains, looking down at the fires of the High Rider siege camps spreading across the plains like a constellation brought to earth. "We cannot win," I said, the admission harsh in my throat. "The High Riders have the numbers, the supplies, the technology. They can sustain this siege indefinitely while we starve. When they finally attack, we will kill many of them, but we will all die." No one disputed this assessment. They had all seen the tactical reality, understood that we had reached the end of what courage and skill could achieve. Kor spoke first, his voice rough with pain from his recent wound. "Then we die fighting. We make them pay for every meter of ground, every body. We die free." "We do," I agreed. "But the civilians, the children, those who cannot fight, they will not die free. They will be taken alive and enslaved, made examples of to discourage future revolts. Their suffering will be legendary, designed to echo through generations as warning against defying the High Riders." The silence that followed was absolute. This was the truth we had all avoided acknowledging, that our rebellion, regardless of its righteousness, had condemned not just ourselves, but everyone who had joined us or been born into our cause. "There is another option," I said finally. "A harder one. We make our stand here on this mountain. All of us. Every fighter, every civilian, every child. We fight together and die together, ensuring that no one is taken alive. The High Riders will have their victory, but it will be victory over corpses, not recaptured slaves. They will get no satisfaction, no object lessons, no return on their investment in crushing us." The commanders understood immediately what I was proposing: a suicide stand. Not a strategic withdrawal or desperate gamble, but a conscious decision to ensure that our deaths would at least be our own, chosen rather than imposed. It violated every tactical principle, every survival instinct. It was exactly the choice Unamaus had spoken of years before. The choice to determine the manner of our death even when we could not determine its timing. They voted unanimously to accept. We returned to our camps and explained the decision to the civilians. Some protested, some wept, but most accepted the logic with the weary pragmatism of people who had seen too much horror to believe in miraculous rescue. We prepared our defenses on the mountain, not to hold out for reinforcement that would never come, not to buy time for escape that was impossible, but simply to kill as many High Riders as possible before we fell. Every adult capable of holding a weapon was armed. Every position was fortified to withstand sustained assault. The High Riders launched their final offensive 3 days later. 1 million soldiers climbing the mountain in waves, mechanized units and artillery providing support. The greatest concentration of force Nuceria had ever assembled. We met them at every defensive line, fought from behind every fortification, killed them in numbers that shocked even their most pessimistic commanders. The Nails granted me their gift continuously throughout that battle, the chemical rewards flowing so constantly they lost meaning. I killed until killing became automatic, a function of my body divorced from conscious thought. Around me, the Eaters of Cities fought with the fury of those who know they are dying but refuse to die cheaply. We held the mountain for 6 hours. By the time the High Rider forces finally breached our innermost defensive line, they had suffered casualties approaching 40% of their initial force. 400,000 dead for the privilege of exterminating 40,000 slaves. The Nucerian histories would later claim this as a great victory, a demonstration of the High Rider's commitment to maintaining order. But I knew, standing in the inner camp, surrounded by the last of my warriors, while High Rider troops poured through our broken defenses, that we had already won something they could never take back. We had proven that slaves could fight, could organize, could nearly defeat the entire combined might of Nucerian civilization. That knowledge would survive our deaths, would inspire future generations of enslaved people to dream of freedom and perhaps, someday, achieve it. Kor died defending the field hospital where we had sheltered the wounded and children. He killed 37 High Rider soldiers before sheer numbers overwhelmed him. The other commanders fell one by one, holding positions until they were literally buried under enemy corpses. Within minutes, I alone remained standing, surrounded by the last 300 eaters of cities who still possessed the strength to hold weapons. The High Riders formed a perimeter around us, thousands of troops maintaining careful distance, artillery pieces aimed directly at our position. They had learned through costly experience not to close with us unnecessarily. Better to contain us and reduce our position through sustained fire than to accept the casualties that close combat would entail. This was the moment, the end I had foreseen and prepared for. I raised my weapon, ready to lead my last brothers and sisters in a final charge that would see us all dead but free. And that was when the sky tore open. I had never seen a spacecraft before. Nuceria possessed limited orbital infrastructure, ancient satellites and communication arrays that barely functioned, but nothing that approached the scale of what appeared above us now. A vessel of golden metal descended through cloud cover, its form vast enough to cast shadows across the entire mountain. The sight was impossible, absurd, a hallucination born of exhaustion and the nail's continuous activation. But it was real. The High Rider troops broke formation, staring upward at this thing that defied all their understanding. Some raised weapons, fired at the descending vessel with artillery and small arms that might as well have been throwing stones at a mountain. The vessel did not respond to their attacks, simply continued its measured descent until it hovered perhaps 100 meters above our position, so close that the displacement of air from its presence knocked soldiers from their feet. Then he appeared, not emerging from a hatch or deploying via any mechanism I could identify, simply standing suddenly on the rock face above us, as if he had always been there and we had only just noticed his presence. The Emperor of Mankind. I did not know his title then, did not understand what I was seeing. I knew only that something in my blood recognized him, that every cell of my enhanced physiology screamed that this being was connected to me in ways that transcended simple kinship. He was massive, tall even by my standards, his form clad in golden armor that seemed to drink in the mountain sunlight and transform it into something more than light. His face was bare, unhelmed, features that were perfect without being soft, that radiated authority and power without cruelty. And his eyes, when they fixed upon me, carried a weight I had never experienced. Not the contempt of the High Riders, not the fear of opponents, not the camaraderie of fellow gladiators. Something else entirely. Recognition, purpose, expectation. "Angron," he said. And his voice was not loud, but it carried perfectly through the noise of the battlefield, reached my ears with absolute clarity despite the distance between us. "My son, you do not need to die here." The words meant nothing, made no sense within the context of my existence. Son? I had no father. I was slave-born, property of the High Riders, my parentage unknown and irrelevant to everyone, including myself. And yet the blood knew. The Primarch physiology that had granted me strength beyond human limits, healing that defied mortal wounds, tactical genius that let me command armies despite having no formal training. All of that suddenly made sense if this being before me was somehow responsible for my creation. "I do not know you," I shouted back, aware of the Eaters of Cities watching this exchange, aware of the High Rider troops maintaining their perimeter, aware that reality itself had suddenly become negotiable in ways that terrified me more than any arena combat. "But you know me," the Emperor replied, and it was not a question. "In your blood, in your bones, in the capabilities that have allowed you to survive when any normal human would have died 1,000 times over. You are my son, Angron, one of 20, created for a purpose that transcends this world and its petty conflicts. His words were weapons. Each one struck with precision, targeting not just my conscious mind, but something deeper, some understanding that existed beneath language. I found myself taking a step forward, my weapon lowering without conscious decision, my body responding to his presence in ways I could not control. No. I forced the word out through teeth clenched against the nail's sudden spike of activity. The implants responded to my emotional state, my conflict, flooding my system with pain that demanded immediate violence. I will not abandon my brothers, my sisters. We fight together and die together. That is the choice we made. A choice born of desperation, the Emperor said, descending now from his elevated position, moving down the rock face toward me, with movements that suggested he had decided to close the physical distance between us. Not true choice. True choice requires alternatives, Angron. I offer you an alternative. The High Rider troops began advancing again, apparently deciding that this stranger, golden armor or not, represented an opportunity to finally end the slave revolt. Artillery opened fire, shells tracking toward the Emperor's position. He raised one hand, a casual gesture, and the shells detonated in midair, their destruction creating a pattern of perfect spherical explosions that harmed nothing except the clouds above. The advancing troops stopped. They were not fools. Whatever they faced in the Golden Stranger was not something their weapons could affect. "Come with me," the Emperor said, now standing close enough that I could see my reflection in his armor, could see how small and broken I looked compared to his perfection. "Leave this world behind. I will give you a legion to command, armies beyond counting, worlds to conquer. You were made for war, Angron. But not this war, not this small thing. The galaxy awaits you." Every word was true. I could feel the truth of it resonating through my enhanced biology. I had been made for war, designed and crafted for it with capabilities that dwarfed anything evolution could produce naturally. But he did not understand, could not understand what he was offering and what he was asking me to abandon. I looked back at the 300 eaters of cities still standing behind me. They watched me with expressions I could not read, hope and fear and resignation mixing into something that had no name. They had followed me into rebellion, into war, into this mountain, knowing death was the only possible outcome. And now a golden stranger appeared from the sky, offering salvation to me alone. "Take them," I said, turning back to face the Emperor. "Take all of them. Every fighter, every civilian, every child. Take us all from this world, and I will serve you. I will command your legion, conquer your galaxy, fulfill whatever purpose you designed into my flesh. But I will not abandon those who fought beside me." The Emperor's expression did not change, but something in his posture suggested I had said something unexpected. "That is not possible. My vessel can accommodate you, Angron. You alone. The others must remain." "Then I remain," I replied, raising my weapon again, feeling the nails spike with approval at the decision to reject his offer, to choose violence and death over compromise and survival. "I will not abandon my brothers and sisters. We die together or we live together. You choose death for pride," the Emperor stated, and for the first time there was something like emotion in his voice. Disappointment, perhaps, or frustration at encountering a problem that could not be solved through simple demonstration of overwhelming power. "Death for loyalty," I corrected. "For honor, for the only thing that has given my existence meaning beyond the entertainment of slavers and the hunger of these fucking nails in my skull." I saw understanding flash across his features then. Recognition of what the butcher's nails were, what they had done to me, how they complicated the simple narrative of rescue and restoration he had intended. His gaze tracked to my temples where the implant's ports were visible through scarred skin. "Those can be removed," he said, and it might have been meant as reassurance. "My Mechanicum adepts are skilled beyond anything Nuceria possesses." They can extract the implants, repair the damage, restore your mind to its proper function. Hope flared in my chest, bright and agonizing. To be free of the nails, to exist without the constant hunger and pain and those brief, terrible moments of clarity that only killing provided. To be whole. The hope lasted perhaps 3 seconds before cold logic reasserted itself. In how long? I asked. How long would extraction take? The Emperor paused, his expression suggesting he recognized the trap inherent in the question. The procedure is complex. Months, perhaps years, to fully map the neural damage and develop appropriate treatment protocols. We have minutes, I replied, gesturing to the High Rider forces, to the artillery being repositioned now that their initial attacks had failed, to the commanders surely calling for reinforcements and specialized weapons to deal with this new threat. If I leave with you now, my people die. The High Riders will butcher them for entertainment, slowly and publicly, as object lessons to every other Slav on Nuceria. Their suffering will be designed to last, to be remembered, to break the spirit of every enslaved person who hears what happened to the Eaters of Cities. I can protect them, the Emperor said, and I heard the first hint of desperation in his voice, the recognition that this negotiation was not proceeding as he had anticipated. I can transport them to the ship, hold them in stasis until what? I interrupted. Until you decide they have value beyond their connection to me? Until you determine whether they are useful enough to merit continued existence? They are not bargaining chips or resources to be evaluated. They are my brothers and sisters. They are the only family I have ever known. And I will not trade them for power or comfort or freedom from the nails. The Emperor was silent for a long moment. Around us, the battlefield waited. The High Riders held their positions but did not retreat, clearly hoping that whatever authority this stranger represented might be used against us. The Eaters of Cities maintained their defensive formation, weapons ready, their eyes fixed on me rather than the golden figure who promised salvation to their leader. "You are my son," the Emperor said finally, and something in his tone had shifted, become harder, more absolute. Created for a purpose that encompasses far more than this small rebellion on an insignificant world. You will come with me, Angron, now. This is not a request. I felt power build around him then. A pressure that had nothing to do with physical force. Psychic energy, I would later learn. The Emperor's mastery of the immaterium, allowing him to impose his will directly on reality itself. He intended to simply take me, regardless of my consent, to remove me from this mountain through means that made physical resistance meaningless. I should have fought, should have raged against this violation of my autonomy, but the nails chose that moment to spike with intensity that eclipsed anything I had ever experienced. Pain so overwhelming that my legs buckled, that I fell to my knees on the mountain stone while something screamed inside my skull. The Emperor stepped forward, his hand extending toward me, and I understood in that moment of clarity the nails sometimes granted that he was saving me. Not in the way I wanted, not in a way that honored my choices or respected my bonds with those I considered family, but saving me nonetheless from certain death on this mountain. His hand touched my shoulder. The world dissolved into golden light, and the last thing I saw before teleportation claimed me was the faces of the Eaters of Cities, their expressions of betrayal and understanding mixing into something I would carry forever. They knew. They understood what was happening. Their leader was being taken from them, removed by power they could not fight and for purposes they would never comprehend. And they forgave me. Even as my form dissolved into light, even as I was stolen from them by the golden stranger who claimed to be my father, they forgave me because they knew I had not chosen this. I had chosen to die with them. The Emperor had chosen otherwise. I materialized on the bridge of the Emperor's flagship in an explosion of displaced air and golden light. The teleportation effect faded, leaving me standing on a deck that stretched further than most city blocks, surrounded by serfs and servitors and armored figures whose scale matched my own. Space Marines, I would later learn. Warriors created from my genetic template, soldiers who carried diluted versions of the capabilities that made me Primarch. They stared at me with expressions that mixed awe and uncertainty, seeing their Primarch for the first time, this broken thing that their Emperor had deemed important enough to personally retrieve. I stood there, chest heaving with emotion that the nails translated into pure rage, and looked back at the Emperor who had brought me to this place. "Send me back," I said. The words coming out wrong through vocal cords, strained by screaming. "Send me back to the mountain. Let me die with them." "No," the Emperor replied, his tone absolute. "You will remain here. You will heal. You will take command of your legion. You will fulfill the purpose for which you were created." I charged him, not as a tactical decision, not as any kind of coherent plan. The nails demanded violence, and he was the closest target, the author of my current suffering. I covered the distance between us in less than a second, my gladiator's instincts guiding my strike toward vulnerabilities in his armor. He caught my wrist without apparent effort, his grip like stone, his expression unchanged by my attack. "Your anger is understood," he said, still holding my arm immobile despite my enhanced strength. "But it is misdirected. I have saved you, Angron, preserved you for the service you were created to provide. You have murdered them," I spat back, past rational argument. Now, the nails in full control. "Everyone I ever cared about. Everyone who trusted me. You have murdered them by removing me from their defense." "They were already dead," the Emperor stated, releasing my wrist and stepping back. "No possible outcome existed where you and your followers survived on that mountain. I simply ensured that at least one did survive, that you were not wasted in meaningless sacrifice." Meaningless. The word echoed through my mind even through the nails' interference. He saw my death, my choice to stand with my brothers and sisters, as meaningless sacrifice, as waste. Not as honor or loyalty or the only moral choice available in an impossible situation, as simple waste of a resource he had invested in creating. I attacked again, and again. Each time he stopped me with minimal effort, his psychic mastery and physical capabilities dwarfing even my Primarch strength. Around us, the Space Marines watched their Gene Father attempt to kill their Emperor, and did nothing because he had not commanded them to intervene. Eventually, when the nails' activation had reached a pitch that left me barely capable of standing, I stopped attacking and simply stood there, shaking on that vast bridge, staring at the being who claimed to be my father. "Take me back," I said one final time, the words barely audible through the pain. "Please, let me die with purpose rather than live with this." "No," he replied. And that was the end of it. The Emperor gestured and 2 apothecaries approached, bearing equipment I did not recognize. They sedated me with drugs powerful enough to affect Primarch physiology, and consciousness faded into chemical darkness. I woke in a medical bay, restrained to a table that had been specifically designed to hold something with Primarch strength. The apothecaries were examining the nails, running SCA and analyzing data, their expressions grim behind surgical masks. I could hear them discussing the implants in technical language I did not fully understand, but the conclusion was clear from their tone. The nails could not be safely removed. The implants had integrated too deeply with my brain's pain centers, had formed connections with neural structures that could not be severed without causing catastrophic damage. Any attempt at removal would result in death or permanent cognitive impairment far worse than what the implants themselves caused. "He is awake," one of the apothecaries noted, seeing my eyes open. "Inform the Emperor." The Emperor arrived within minutes, his presence filling the medical bay despite its enormous size. He stood at the foot of the examination table, studying me with an expression I could not read. "The nails cannot be removed without killing you," he stated, characteristically direct. My Mechanicum adepts have examined every option. The technology is crude but effective. Whoever installed them ensured they could never be safely extracted. I laughed, actually laughed, the sound harsh and broken in the medical bay's filtered air. So I am trapped, in the nails, in your service, in a life I never chose. Where is the salvation in this? You live, the Emperor replied. You retain your capabilities. You can still fulfill your purpose. The implants are regrettable, but they do not prevent you from serving as I require. Serving, I repeated, tasting the word. I was a slave on Nuceria. Now I am a slave to you. The chains are just more comfortable. Something flickered across the Emperor's features then. Not quite anger, not quite disappointment, perhaps frustration that his creation refused to see the gift being offered. You are my son. You will command the 12th Legion. You will be granted power and authority beyond anything you experienced on that slave world. This is not servitude. This is elevation. 2 purposes I do not choose. 2 wars I do not select. Following orders I cannot refuse. Yes, I said, meeting his gaze despite the nails beginning to spike again in response to my emotional state. That is the definition of servitude. The fact that the cage is larger does not make it less a cage. The Emperor was silent for a long moment. Then he leaned forward, his voice lowering but losing none of its authority. The alternative was death on that mountain. Death for you and everyone you claim to care about. I offered you life, Angron. That you refuse to appreciate the gift does not change its value. I did not ask for life, I replied. I asked for death with meaning. You have given me life without purpose beyond serving your ambitions. If you cannot see the difference, if you cannot understand why I would choose the former over the latter, then you are not my father. You are simply another master wearing a different face. His hand moved almost too fast to track, striking the table beside my head with enough force to buckle the reinforced metal. Not striking me, carefully, controlled despite the obvious anger behind the gesture, but making clear that his patience had limits. You will serve, he said, each word delivered with absolute finality. You will command the 12th Legion. You will prosecute the crusade in whatever sectors I assign to you. And you will do these things because you are my son, and you have responsibilities that transcend your personal preferences. Your rebellion is noted. Your anger is understood. Neither changes what you are or what you will do. He turned to leave the medical bay, paused at the entrance. The nails will remain. You will learn to function with them, as you did on Nuceria. The apothecaries report that you have already demonstrated capacity to manage their effects through conscious effort. You will continue to develop this capacity, and you will do it while serving the Imperium, not dying for the entertainment of slave masters or the satisfaction of your own pride. Then he was gone, and I was alone, with the apothecaries and the restraints and the nails singing their constant song of hunger and pain in my skull. This was salvation. This was the alternative to death on the mountain with my brothers and sisters. Eternal service to a father who saw me as a resource to be managed rather than a person to be understood. They presented the 12th Legion to me 3 days later, after the apothecaries had declared me sufficiently recovered from the immediate effects of teleportation and sedation. 10,000 Space Marines assembled in the flagship's primary hangar bay, warriors who carried my genetic legacy, who had been created using genetic material harvested from my Primarch biology before I had even been fully grown in the Emperor's laboratories. The Warhounds, they called themselves. A name chosen before they knew their Primarch, before they understood what manner of being their gene father would prove to be. They stood in perfect formation, their armor painted white and blue, their weapons held at parade rest, their eyes fixed forward with the discipline of soldiers who had fought 100 campaigns across the growing Imperium. I stood on an elevated platform, looking down at them, and felt nothing but emptiness where pride or connection should have been. These were not my brothers. They had not bled beside me in the arena pits or fought for freedom on Nuceria's mountains. They were strangers wearing my face, warriors created without my consent to serve purposes I had not chosen. Brothers, I began, the word ashes on my tongue. I am Angron, your Primarch, your Gene Father. The Emperor has given me to you, or perhaps given you to me. I am uncertain of the proper possessive relationship. Regardless, I stand before you because I have no choice, because I was taken from the people I considered my true brothers and sisters so that I might lead you instead. Shocked silence greeted this introduction. They had expected, I suppose, some speech about honor and glory and the righteousness of the crusade. The standard Primarch rhetoric that their Emperor-assigned commanders had doubtlessly prepared them to hear. Instead, I gave them truth. I do not want to be here, I continued, letting the nails' influence color my voice, letting them hear the barely contained rage that was my constant state. I did not choose you. You did not choose me. We are both victims of the Emperor's grand design, pieces moved on a board we do not see in service of purposes we are not permitted to question, but we are here nonetheless, and we will fight together because the alternative is to fight alone. And even I am not arrogant enough to believe I can prosecute war across the galaxy without an army. I paused, scanning the assembled legion, seeing their reactions. Some looked confused, others angry at what they perceived as insult to the Emperor or to themselves. A few, a very few, showed something that might have been understanding. Those were the ones I focused on when I continued. I will not lie to you. I will not pretend that I am grateful for this reunion or excited about commanding you. The butcher's nails in my skull ensure that I am in constant pain, that I crave violence with an intensity that eclipses all other drives, that I can only find brief moments of clarity through killing. You will serve under a Primarch who is broken, who is in many ways more beast than man, who will lead you into wars without thought for casualty ratios or strategic elegance because the nails demand constant forward motion into violence. But I will give you one promise, I said, my voice rising to carry across the entire hangar bay. I will never lie to you about what we are doing or why. I will never pretend that this crusade is anything other than what it is. A war of conquest waged by an emperor who believes he has the right to bring every human world under his authority. I will not dress it in nobility or righteousness. We will kill because that is what we are made for, because the emperor commands it, and because the alternative is to be discarded as I would have been discarded had I refused to serve. The silence that followed was absolute. I had just committed what most of the Imperium would consider heresy, questioning the Emperor's motives and the Crusade's righteousness in front of an entire legion. Protocol would have demanded that senior officers step forward to arrest me, to report this deviation from expected Primarch behavior, but no one moved. Perhaps because I was Primarch and they were unsure whether any authority could supersede mine within my own legion. Perhaps because something in my words resonated with experiences they had accumulated during their campaigns. Or perhaps simply because I was too large and too obviously dangerous for any individual officer to feel confident confronting. We are the 12th Legion, I concluded. We are war hounds no longer. From this day forward, we are the World Eaters, because that is what we do. We eat worlds. We consume civilizations. We destroy in the Emperor's name because that is the only purpose we have been permitted. Let us at least be honest about it. The name was not carefully chosen. It came from rage and pain and the nail's constant pressure. But it stuck. Within days, the entire Legion had begun referring to themselves as World Eaters, had started painting their armor in the colors of blood and war, had embraced the identity I had given them not out of pride, but out of grim acknowledgement of what we were. The Emperor, when informed of my speech and the Legion's new name, said nothing. Perhaps he recognized that forcing compliance would only deepen my resentment. Perhaps he simply did not care what I called my legion as long as we prosecuted his crusade effectively. Or perhaps he understood that by allowing me this small rebellion, this minor assertion of independence, he could better maintain control over the larger questions of my service. Regardless, the World Eaters became official, and I began learning what it meant to command a legion at war across the stars rather than a gladiator army in a single mountain range. The first world I led the World Eaters against was a human civilization called Genna, a feudal world that had rejected the Imperium's initial compliance overtures and fortified its cities against what they perceived as an invading force. The Emperor's orders were specific. Bring Genna into compliance through whatever means necessary. Minimize destruction of infrastructure where possible. Demonstrate the futility of resistance. Standard Crusade doctrine designed to break worlds to the Imperium's will while preserving their productive capacity for future exploitation. I ignored those orders entirely. The World Eaters descended on Genna not as conquerors, but as destroyers, landing in force in the primary city and killing everyone we encountered. No negotiations, no demands for surrender, no distinction between combatants and civilians. Just pure forward motion into violence, the nails singing their approval as I led my legion through streets turned red with blood. We burned the city, razed it completely, moved to the next population center, and repeated the process. By the time compliance was achieved, Genna's population had been reduced by 90%, and its infrastructure was so damaged as to be worthless for decades. The Emperor summoned me to Terra to answer for this violation of his orders. I stood before him in the throne room, surrounded by custodians and Mechanicum adepts and representatives from other legions who had been called to witness whatever judgment he intended to render. "Explain your actions on Genna," he commanded, his voice neutral but his eyes containing warning. "I complied with your orders," I replied, meeting his gaze without deference. "Genna is now part of the Imperium. The survivors have accepted your authority. That they did so after witnessing the complete destruction of their civilization rather than through negotiation seems a tactical detail. You murdered millions of Imperial citizens," one of the observers stated, a representative from the Mechanicum whose name I did not bother learning. "Slaughtered them without cause or purpose beyond satisfying your own bloodlust." "They were not Imperial citizens until after I had killed them," I corrected. "And I satisfied nothing. The nails in my skull ensure that I am never satisfied, only briefly less agonized. Every person I killed on Genna bought me perhaps 3 seconds of clarity before the hunger returned. Do you understand what that means? How many people I must kill daily simply to achieve enough functional clarity to command this legion?" The Mechanicum representative had no answer. The Emperor's expression remained unchanged. "You will adhere standard compliance doctrine in future campaigns," he stated, not a suggestion or request. "Yes," I agreed, knowing the promise was meaningless. "I will adhere perfectly, right up until the nails spike and I lead my legion into uncontrolled slaughter, because that is the only action that grants me respite from the agony you claim to understand." "The nails can be managed," the Emperor insisted. "You demonstrated capacity for tactical restraint on Nuceria despite their influence." "I had motivation on Nuceria," I replied. "Brothers and sisters I cared about, a cause beyond simple survival. What motivation exists in your crusade? Comply or die is not a cause. It is simply tyranny dressed in the language of unification. Why should I restrain the nails' demands when doing so serves no purpose beyond preserving infrastructure for an Imperium I never agreed to serve?" This was the heart of it, the fundamental conflict that no amount of discussion or discipline could resolve. I obeyed the Emperor because I lacked alternatives, not because I believed in his crusade. An absent belief, absent genuine commitment to the Imperium's goals, I had no reason to fight the nails' influence. Better to let them guide me, to embrace the violence they demanded, because at least in that violence I could find brief moments of peace. The Emperor could have executed me then. could have declared me too broken to serve, harvested my gene seed, and distributed it among the World Eaters to continue the Legion's existence without their problematic Primarch. But he did not. Perhaps because I was still effective at breaking worlds, perhaps because he hoped I might eventually come to accept my role, perhaps simply because I was his son, and some paternal instinct prevented him from discarding me despite my flaws. "You will return to the Crusade," he finally decreed, "and you will attempt to adhere to compliance doctrine. If you find this impossible due to the Nails' influence, you will report as much to Crusade Command and appropriate campaigns will be assigned. But you will not slaughter civilian populations without cause, Angron. That is my command." I bowed, the gesture mocking in its perfection. "As you command, Father." I never called him father without bitter emphasis. Never let him forget that the title was biological fact rather than emotional bond. The Emperor's expression suggested he noted this defiance, but chose not to address it in this venue. I departed Terra and returned to my Legion, to the wars that never ended, to the violence that was the only meaning left to my existence. The Crusade continued for decades. World after world brought into compliance through force or threat of force. The World Eaters developed a reputation across the Imperium, not as glorious warriors or noble defenders of humanity, but as savages barely restrained by their Primarch. Butchers who left behind mountains of corpses and burning cities. Other legions avoided working alongside us. Even the Space Wolves, themselves known for ferocity, maintained careful distance from the World Eaters during joint campaigns. We were effective, that was undeniable. When the World Eaters were deployed to a system, compliance was achieved rapidly and absolutely. But the cost in lives and infrastructure far exceeded what other legions produced. And my behavior grew increasingly erratic as the decades passed. The Nails were worsening. That was the conclusion the apothecaries eventually reached after decades of monitoring my condition. The implants were degrading my brain tissue, slowly destroying the structures they had been designed to manipulate. My moments of clarity became briefer, the pain between them more intense. I required more killing to achieve the same level of respite. What had once been manageable, just barely, became increasingly uncontrollable. And I made a decision that would define the World Eaters forever. If I was condemned to live with the Nails, if I was denied both death with my gladiator brothers and freedom from the implants that made my existence agony, then my Legion would share this burden. I ordered the apothecaries to begin implanting the Nails into willing World Eaters. The order was insanity. The apothecaries reported as much, explaining that the implants carried extreme mortality risk and would degrade the Legion's effectiveness over time. I commanded it anyway, and volunteers came forward. Thousands of World Eaters who had observed their Primarch's suffering, who understood what the Nails did, who chose to share my curse rather than watch me bear it alone. They understood that the implants would eventually kill them, that they were volunteering for eventual madness and death. They did it anyway, because they were my sons, because shared suffering created bonds that even the Nails could not completely sever. Within a decade, nearly the entire World Eaters Legion had been implanted with versions of the Butcher's Nails. We became something unique in the Imperium, a force of enhanced warriors driven by the same neural compulsion, capable of incredible violence but increasingly incapable of restraint or mercy. The Emperor could have stopped this, could have ordered the implantation program ceased, could have disciplined or executed me for deliberately damaging his Legion, but he did not. Perhaps because the nailed World Eaters were effective despite their instability. Perhaps because he recognized that my action was born from the same loyalty that had made me refuse to abandon my gladiator brothers, twisted now into a form appropriate to my new circumstances. Or perhaps because he understood that some battles are not worth fighting, that attempting to prevent the implantation would have required destroying the World Eaters entirely and starting fresh with a new 12th Legion. So the implantation program continued. And the World Eaters became what we remain today, Warriors bound together by shared suffering, brothers in chains that could not be broken because they were woven into our very neurology. It was not the family I had chosen on Nuceria, but it was the family circumstance had permitted. I have commanded the World Eaters for over a century now. We have brought hundreds of worlds into compliance with the Imperium, killed millions in the Emperor's name, prosecuted his crusade across sectors too numerous to count. And I have learned certain truths that the Emperor would prefer remained unspoken. The first truth is that salvation offered without consent is simply another form of slavery. The Emperor saved me from death on that mountain, preserved me for service to his grand design, and in doing so, he sentenced me to a life of pain and violence that has no end except the death he denied me. I was not rescued, I was stolen. My choice was taken from me. My brothers and sisters died alone, while I was teleported away to serve purposes I had not chosen. He calls this salvation. I call it what it is: the replacement of one set of chains with another. The Nucerian High Riders at least were honest about what they were doing. They did not pretend that implanting the nails was for my benefit, or that enslaving me served some higher purpose. They wanted entertainment and profit, and they used me to achieve those goals. The Emperor claims higher motives, speaks of human unity and protection against Xenos threats and the necessity of bringing order to the galaxy. But the effect is the same. I am a tool, a weapon, property that happens to be able to speak and think and feel. The second truth is that the nails are not simply technology, they are metaphor. Every human in the Imperium lives with their own version of the butcher's nails, neural constraints that demand compliance and punish deviation. They call it duty or loyalty or service, dress it in nobility and honor, but the function is identical to what was installed in my skull: obey or suffer, serve or die. The Imperium is built on this principle, a galaxy-spanning civilization held together by the same logic that governed the Nucerian slave pits. The Emperor saved me, they say. But what did he save me for? A life of killing in his name, rather than killing for the High Rider's entertainment. The scope has changed. The scale is larger, but the fundamental nature of my existence remains unchanged. I am a killer, because that is what my biology and my implants demand. The only difference is that now I kill for an emperor rather than slave masters, and the killing is called glorious service rather than blood sport. The third truth, the one that haunts my moments of clarity, is that there was no good choice on that mountain. If I had died with the Eaters of Cities, I would have abandoned the World Eaters to command by someone who did not understand them or their condition. If I had accepted the Emperor's offer immediately, I would have betrayed everything I believed about loyalty and chosen brotherhood. There was no path that honored all my obligations, satisfied all moral requirements. Only the choice between different failures, different betrayals. The Emperor made that choice for me, decided that my survival and service to his Imperium outweighed my wishes or the lives of the people I considered family. He calls this salvation. I call it what I have always called it: theft. The theft of my agency, my choice, my death. And this is what I want understood about that day on the mountain, about the moment the golden figure descended from the sky and claimed me as his son. Salvation is not always gift. Sometimes it is simply the imposition of someone else's will, dressed in the language of rescue to make it palatable. The Emperor saved me, and in doing so, he ensured that I would never forgive him. Not for the rescue, but for denying me the choice of whether to be rescued. For deciding that his purposes were more important than my preferences. For treating me as property to be preserved, rather than as a person whose wishes merited consideration. They say I should be grateful. That I should recognize the honor of commanding a legion, of serving at my Gene Father's side in the Great Crusade. That I should appreciate the life I was given rather than mourning the death I was denied. But gratitude requires genuine gift, not coerced obligation, and honor requires choice, not compelled service. I was given neither. I have only what remains after those were stolen from me. Rage, pain, the nail's constant hunger, and the knowledge that somewhere on Nuceria, 300 eaters of cities died without their leader, died believing I had abandoned them, died in agony and despair because the Emperor decided my survival was more important than their lives. That knowledge is my true inheritance from that day. Not Legion command or Primarch, authority or the capability to reshape worlds. Just the understanding that salvation, when imposed without consent, is simply another name for captivity, and that some cages are large enough to span galaxies, while remaining cages nonetheless. This is the dark truth behind the day I was taken from Nuceria. The truth that the chronicles do not record, that the historians carefully omit from their accounts of Primarch reunification. I was not saved. I was denied the death I had chosen, the death I had earned alongside those who fought for freedom rather than accepting chains. The Emperor calls what happened on that mountain rescue. But rescue implies agency on the part of the rescued, implies that the person saved wanted to be saved. I wanted to die, wanted to stand with my brothers and sisters until the end, to ensure that our rebellion meant something beyond simply providing entertainment for our one final battle. He denied me that choice, took me from the mountain not for my sake, but for his own purposes, to preserve a resource he had invested in creating. And everything that followed, every campaign prosecuted in the Emperor's name, every world broken by the World Eaters, every life taken by warriors bearing the Butcher's nails, all of it stems from that moment, from his decision to save me against my will. They ask me sometimes why I'm angry, why I rage against the Emperor and the Imperium and the crusade that I serve with such obvious resentment. This is why. Because I remember that mountain, remember the faces of those who trusted me to lead them into death with meaning. Remember being stolen away while they died alone. And I remember that the being who claims to be my father, who speaks of love and purpose and grand design, cared more about preserving his asset than respecting his son's choice. That is salvation as the Emperor practices it. And it is the only salvation I will ever receive.